Moving on to question 4. How does surveillance change the world of business, and what does the future hold? Well, the future. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I thought by this time at least I'd be driving a flying car. And so making predictions about the future is, of course, always fraught. But let's talk about the present before we consider the future. And I think a nice way of thinking about recent developments in surveillance is through this concept of surveillance capitalism, something which has become popularized in recent years and something we have to take very seriously. Now, this tends to be associated with the rise of handheld devices, mobile phones and tablets, and also the rise of ubiquitous computing and the reach of the internet. Well, if we think about those things, we tend to think about changes in our thoughts about privacy, the way in which we are, through our mobile devices, willing to reveal things about ourselves to complete strangers that we might not have done in the past. That kind of culture of disclosure, if you like. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect which is important is that, you know, in going through very mundane things like doing internet searches or scrolling through social media platforms, or even just switching on our location button on our phone, we're providing information about ourselves, what we're thinking about, what we're interested in, who we talk to, the kinds of people we talk to, the kinds of groups that we're members of, and literally where we are at any moment in time. Now, that's all information, and there's a lot of it. And so the idea of surveillance capitalism is that complexity of data can be analyzed using things like algorithms to understand who we are, what makes us tick, and not only what makes us tick, but also the kinds of things that we might be interested in doing in the future. And from that, we can make predictions about our patterns of consumption, where we're going to go, what we're going to do, and in some way, these kinds of organizations that analyze these data can make predictions and almost go as far as to influence our future behavior. Now, that's one aspect of surveillance capitalism. Another aspect of surveillance capitalism, which of course is important, is the way in which those kinds of technologies have enabled new ways of doing business. You can think about the so-called platform companies like Uber and the way it disrupted something as mundane as the taxi industry, or something like Airbnb and the way that has disrupted the hotel industry, or something like Amazon and the way in which that has quite literally transformed the physical terrain of our high streets, as more and more retail businesses find it difficult to justify having bricks and mortar outlets. Okay, so we have a pattern there about what the future might look like, which is more of that kind of activity. But I think that something we need to be mindful of is that, you know, the way I present it in the book is that we simultaneously, first of all, underestimate the way in which organizations have always claimed the right to know as much about us as they possibly can. You know, what boss doesn't want to know everything there is about an employee to know whether they are working as hard as they possibly can all the time. So in a sense, our ideas about privacy, particularly in the workplace, perhaps not in wider society, but our ideas about privacy in the workplace have always been associated with a certain expectation that we sign over a right to privacy in signing a contract. So organizations have simultaneously always wanted to know about their employees and what they're doing at any moment in time, and have sought ways of doing that. But at the same time, I think that we also overestimate the ability of things like algorithms or techniques of big data to make predictions about our behavior and actually to influence our behavior as well. And what I mean by that is just because you think you know more and more about another person, that you know ultimately all there is to know about another person, doesn't mean to say that you really know them, that you can really make predictions about them. And it goes back to that point I was making about turning people from subjects into objects through classification and through evaluation. We turn those people through surveillance into a certain kind of person, which we think reveals their true identity, if you like, their true selves. But of course, those are just a caricature of that individual. We have turned them into a data point, something which is only known through a number or a classification or something like that. When of course there is much more to human life than those kinds of things. And I think this is ultimately empowering because we know that we cannot be simply reduced to a number. The classic call from that the 60s TV show The Prisoner, I am not a number. Well, we are not a number because there is more to humanity than just being classified and evaluated in that way. And so ultimately, I think my view is optimistic that despite the worst predictions about how organizations are going to basically know all there is to know about us and control every aspect of our lives, is almost certainly an overestimation of the situation and can be resisted.